So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I begin to know some of you too, so again, I like to see that. But come again. Today we have a very special presentation. Actually, I have to say that we scheduled another one, but there was a cancellation. So then we found out that we can schedule this and actually it's more fun. I think today's presentation and presenter is the most youthful we have ever done in CI UN level. That doesn't mean they're anything, but that means they're young and good. So the two speakers, one is by on the left-hand side is Megan Hill. She is a Ph.D. candidate in the musicology department of school music. On the right-hand side is Mr. Evan Ware. He is a Ph.D. student in the composition and theory department. Last summer, June, right? Yeah, June we had a chance. We sent 3 advanced graduate students to Beijing for summer camp. So from what I heard, they had fun and learned a lot about it. And this is something we want to do because we want to send graduate students, even undergraduate students, to China to do cultural people diplomacy and learning and have fun with each other. So this is what we'll do. So if you like today's presentation and see that what they've been doing in China, all expenses paid, by the way. So tell your kids and students at if they come to CI events and be nice, then I will find ways to send them to China, all paid for. And you have a good time there. Well, I mean, there's no age limit, so if you enroll as a student, you have that quality, but if you're not, you can't do it. So, without further ado, let's go on to this fun, youthful presentation. I like the title very much, because I must say, these are some of my favorite students at school music. So Americans in Beijing, so let's see what kind of Americans they are.
Technically, only one of us is American, but nonetheless.
I take American to mean North American.
Oh, you'll keep
Because I'm from Canada.
Thank you very much. As Professor Lam explained, we're both music students, and we had the chance to, through the UM's Confucius Institute, have the really amazing opportunity to join the Music Confucius Institute in Beijing's first annual summer music camp, which they offer to, I guess, anyone from not China, international students, and we're very grateful to the UMCI for that opportunity, so thank you very much. We had you can see in the picture, the other student who came with us is our colleague in the musicology department, Law. He would be here, but he's actually in Hong Kong right now doing his dissertation fieldwork. So the 3 of us had the chance to go, and
Well, the purpose of the trip was to cultivate an interest in Chinese music, something that I think was a bit of a mystery for both Megan and I before we left. And the results of the 2 weeks that we spent in China, I think, profoundly changed our outlook on that music of that venerable culture, and certainly opened a lot of doors for further investigations.
Absolutely. So our presentation today is basically to give you a walk through our trip, talk about our experiences, the friends we made, the different aspects of the culture that we had the chance to encounter, some small instances of culture shocks and things that surprised us, and just how our perspective broadened through this experience.
So let's start off by asking the question, what is the Music Confucius Institute summer camp? Summer camp is not something I have gone to since I was a little kid. So at first, none of us knew what we were getting into, and it seemed that nobody else did either. There was a lot of mystery surrounding what exactly we would be doing when we got there, and we were not going to really find out until we landed in Beijing.
So we received a rough schedule before we got there, and it seems like, I think that since this was the first annual camp, that they were piecing it together as they went along too. But when we arrived, we got to the airport. Ho Chak agreed to meet us, and he took us to our hotel, where we met our fellow campers. There were 13 of us in total. Here's a picture of our group visiting the Tiananmen Square. And besides the two of us and Ho-Chak, there were two other Americans from the UCLA, the two in the front corner here, and the rest were European, one Chinese, Danish girl, and the rest were from all from the
Royal Conservatory of Denmark in
right.
Copenhagen.
Some Danish, some Polish, one Italian guy. So it was quite an interesting variety of students, and we all became friends quite quickly. Almost everyone was musicians, and we all had the common, I'd say, ambition to learn as much about Chinese music as we could.
After we arrived at the hotel, we met some of the people who would become very important in the course of our trip. There was Mr. Wang, who is our tour guide, who you can see far right. He was a very, very wonderful man and was instrumental in making the trip what it was. And then there was also Mr. Chile, who is on the left, the tall guy on the left with the sunglasses, who is the secretary for the MCI and our principal translator, and he became a good friend over time as well. So from there we proceeded to go to the Central Conservatory for the first time, which was, I had heard so much about it. It was great to see it in the flesh, as it were. We met Professor Liu, who is the head of the MCI, and the first task was to pick the instruments that we would be performing on in 2 weeks.
Which
This
was
was
news
news.
to us, yeah. We will be performing. So we all went around the table and decided what we'd like to play, and went to the MCI office to pick up our instruments and put them where they would be stored, and then headed to the conservatory cafeteria, where we would be eating most of our meals there. And
Don't normally like to talk about cafeteria food, but here it was actually really quite good. Normally I expect bad key lime pie and overdone chicken, but here we had just about. I mean, we probably ate at the cafeteria almost every day, and I think I saw the same dish twice, only one time. So there was an incredible variety of food, and my impression was that the food was from all over China. So we had kind of a good basic exposure right there. And as you can see, the cafeteria plate looks more or less the same to the kind of plates we would have here, except that the food is a lot more delicious.
So after our cafeteria dinner, we went out for some beers with our new friends at a local pub, and I guess you're not talking about Rasmus.
Yeah, well, here's one of our first instances of culture shock. Our friend Rasmus, who is from Copenhagen, he doesn't drink beer, but they only sold beer here. So he asked for water. And it was really hot. It was about 30 degrees Celsius that day, even at night. So we're all sweating profusely, and they bring him a glass of water. And he touches the glass of water and immediately yanks his hand back because the water's piping hot. We were all really confused why you would serve someone hot water in June. But apparently, as a friend of mine in the composition department here, who's actually in attendance here today at the back, she likes hot water and told me that this is in fact a thing.
Ho-Chak explained that it's somehow better for your throat. I don't quite understand, but sure. But as people used to our ice water, it was kind of a surprise.
She was drinking her ice
Yes.
water.
So let's see. The next day, we went to the opening concert. The MCI put on a concert to open our camp, where we had the chance to hear many performers, graduate students and professors at the conservatory, very impressive performances, and meet the professors who would be giving our lectures that we would hear over the course of the next few weeks at the camp. Oh, here we go. So here's Professor Liu with the microphone introducing the professors who would be giving our presentations, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And after the concert, we began our instrument lessons. So here we are in our practice room with our teacher, who is a graduate student on Erhu. What was her name? I'm sorry.
Duan Yan.
Yes. And our two other Erhu camp members are the two girls from UCLA, who, luckily for them and for us actually, were already experienced on erhu and helped carry us along, shall we say, the concert.
In other words, they were able to cover up the sounds that I was making, which sounded kind of like a dying frog.
So a little bit, why did we choose the erhu? Do you want to talk about that first?
Well, why don't you start with your reasons first?
So I primarily studied Japanese music, and I had studied koto in the past, and so guqin was an option at the camp, but it's so similar to koto, I thought, well, I'd like to try something different. There were flutes around, there was the yangqin, which would be cool too. But I have very little experience with string instruments, and especially very little experience with bowed string instruments. And so I thought, plus I really like the sound of erhu, so I thought I would attack that as a good challenge. And so that's why I chose erhu.
For me, I am, as a composer, have been talking with Vanessa Wei, who's the head of the Chinese Music Ensemble here at the University of Michigan, and she's interested in commissioning me to write a piece for erhu and viola, and I figured I don't know anything about this instrument, so if I'm going to learn anything about it, the best way to learn is by playing, no matter how bad I might be. So I figured this was my chance to really get an understanding for how the instrument works.
And so, let's see, we were separated in our group of 13, according to our instrument. We went and got into our practice rooms and had lessons. Our teacher started with teaching us how to hold the instrument, how to hold the bow properly. And we found, I think both of us, that the hardest part of this instrument, I don't know if anyone here plays erhu, but is the bow hand and having the proper pressure across the bow. It was quite challenging. And so this alone was, going to take a lot of time to at least sort of master in the 2 weeks that we had. Learned a few basic scales, and then went forth trying to learn the couple of Chinese folk songs that we were going to be playing at our concert at the end of the camp. Let's see.
There was a certain language barrier in our lessons. Ms. Duan was not fluent in English. She knew some words and she was able to communicate some basic concepts, but for any of you who have ever taken music lessons or lessons of anything that's complicated, you sometimes need to actually speak and be able to convey concepts. So we were very lucky that Allison, who's sitting in the foreground there, had studied Chinese for some time and was able to help with the translation. Otherwise, we went by imitation. So she would show us bodily how we were supposed to do it, and then we would try and imitate it as best we could. A time-honored way of learning. I found that for my purposes, my experience as a musician, as a composer and a trumpet player, helped me learn at least the theoretical concepts behind the erhu faster than I would have otherwise. I knew something about theory of strings, so I knew roughly where, if I put my fingers on the string, where the semitones would be, where the whole tones would be, what a fifth might look like, and so on. So I was able to figure my way around it. I was not comfortable doing it, but I knew at least enough to get a basic grasp of what I was doing. And here also I found that my experience in the martial arts was very helpful. I practice Japanese fencing, and in Japanese fencing, a lot of what you do is you do repeated basic strikes all the time until it becomes natural. And so I took the same philosophy and applied it to my learning, and I spent most of my practice time just doing bow strokes, trying to make my dying frog at least come onto life support.
So we all had these we had these lessons, but in addition we, over the course of the 2 weeks, had time between other scheduled events in the camp to have practice sessions alone in a practice room. And I think we surprised Chile, the secretary who was kind of in charge of herding us around. All 13 of the camp members, whenever we had a chance to practice, instead of going to rest and take a nap in the hotel or whatever, we always were saying, well, we want to go practice now. And he was like, really? But it was really fun to be with a group who was dedicated and really wanted to do the best they could and put on the best performance we could in 2 weeks. So yeah, I really was pleased with that.
It felt like a long time since I learned a new instrument, and that was just really cool to do again.
So, in addition to learning our instruments, at this camp, we had lectures from 3 different scholars at the conservatory and from another university as well.
Minzu University.
And these were on a range of topics, and they were all very interesting. I think one of the challenges that we had with this was that Chile, the secretary again, was the translator, and he's not a professional translator. His English is very good, and obviously he's a native Chinese speaker, but we found sometimes that we suspected that what he got across to us in English was not quite exactly what the professor had said, and so we did our best to piece together what was going on. Nonetheless, we learned a lot from each of them. The first that we heard from was Professor Zhang, and apologize, we don't speak Chinese, I will murder these pronunciations. Zhang Huaying, do you know her? Okay. Who does Chinese music history. And she mainly, she presented on the vast history of music in China, all the way back to 8,000-year-old flutes that they found, archaeologists have found, up through more recent history, not up to the present, but specifically focusing on guqin, which I suppose is her specialty, and we learned about the guqin's role in Chinese scholarly history and its importance to Confucius, which I'd always seen pictures of him with guqin, but I hadn't realized exactly the importance and icon status that it has with intelligentsia. So that was very interesting.
It was also interesting to note that China has such a long history that music history there is tied in with archaeology in a way that I don't think we would ever think of that in Western music history. So that was also pretty cool. Yeah. So the next person to give a talk was Professor Yu Yang from Minzu University, a composer, and he spoke on 20th and 21st century Chinese composers in the Western classical tradition. And this was very enlightening for me because in the West we love our canons, and so it's very hard sometimes to think outside of our canons, to think outside of Ravel and Debussy and all those kinds of composers. So it was fascinating for me to see how many and how varied were the composers of Western classical music in China, and how Chinese composers had approached issues that I have also approached as a composer, dealing with all of the innovations that were done in the 20th century. China being removed in the middle part of the 20th century from Europe was on the outside of big movements that happened, like Darmstadt. For those of you who know that, so a very, very intellectual kind of musical modernism that happened in the mid-century. And they have this, what I found is that a lot of the Chinese composers have this really interesting approach where it's sort of a kind of a pick and choose. Well, I can just take whatever I like from this because I don't owe any allegiance, which is something that I think my generation of composers started feeling. So, but I think in China this was happening a lot earlier. So that was really interesting. I discovered a lot of very fascinating composers, and I hope to be able to build a course to teach my students about this, because I think it's a repertoire that people should know here.
The third lecture we heard was from Professor Qian Rong, who was talking about the use of Chinese folk music in contemporary popular culture, and specifically about Beijing drum song, and the singer here, Luo Yusheng, and she was talking, not only teaching us about Beijing drum song and what its position is within Chinese folk music and folk song in general, but specifically talking about the use of a rendition that the singer gave, and its use in the TV show from the 1980s, Four Generations Under One Roof. I'm sorry, I don't know the Chinese title. And she explained that before that time, it tended to be the case that the use of folk music in China wasn't used to express something about regions, regionality, or a specific locality, but rather, oh, this is Chinese folk music, it's an emblem of the nation. But from the time that this TV show was done in the 80s, the professor explained that because they used Beijing drum song about this story that was very much about Beijing, that this was the first time that in a pop culture sort of setting that folk music was used to be an emblem of a region. And we got to hear recordings and video of Luo Yusheng, which was fantastic. We really enjoyed that. And yeah, that was basically it. And just that the folk music can emphasize a distinct region through various social, musical, linguistic, dialect sorts of features.
Our final presentation was done by Zhao Lei, an expert in Peking opera, which is in fact a term that he believes shouldn't be used. He feels that Peking is too colonialist, and that he would rather use the term Jingju instead of Peking opera. So, we shall proceed in his honor by using Jingju. He mostly illustrated the history of Jingju through the central personage of Mei Lanfan, one of the great, I gather that one of the great stars of Jingju in the 20th century, and traced its origins in the region of Beijing and Tianjin for us, and how it survived through the various disturbances in China over the course of the 20th century. He detailed to us how the performances incorporate singing, speaking, acting, and acrobatic fighting. He even performed for us some of the songs, which was great. It's always great to see a scholar who is, practically involved with the art as well as just intellectually involved with it.
It was very good.
And one thing that he illustrated, which was quite virtuosic, was the use of mnemonics for drum patterns within Jingju. So this is something that I think probably in lots of musical traditions these kinds of things exist. When I studied No theater music in Japan, there was also mnemonics. But this was quite particular because he was able to reproduce an entire performance simply using his voice. And this is for percussion of all kind. It was really quite amazing to see. I wish I had taken video of it because I would love to watch it again, and I would love to show it to you. The last thing he said, though, both struck us as kind of interesting, and we were curious about what exactly he meant, or if something got lost in translation.
Possibly something got lost in translation.
But he did mention that he did show us a piece of Jingju that was accompanied by a Western orchestra, and his opinion of this, at least as it was translated to us, was that this was a more advanced version of Jingju, which both struck us as unusual, because if you're in the West, the orchestra is kind of an old-fashioned thing. So the concept of an orchestra being advanced is a little unusual to us, but it also has connotations of the after effects of colonialism in East Asia, where everything that was Western was modern, and everything that was modern was better.
And so we hoped that was a mistranslation. We don't want the Chinese folks to think that their music needs to be accompanied by a Western orchestra to be advanced.
And in fact, a Western orchestra will, by the nature of the ensemble, will change what the music is. An orchestra is a big device. And for those of us who've written for it, getting an orchestra to change, to move, takes a lot of time. So it's not, it won't be as supple or as agile as a smaller group of Jingju players.
And it's not the same music at all.
No.
So. Not advanced. So those were our 4 lectures, which we really appreciated the contributions of the 4 professors we got to hear from. Besides the music lessons and the lectures, mainly our time spent in the camp was also traveling, going to see sites around Beijing and outside of the city. So our first excursion was to Tiananmen Square and got to see the iconic facade of the Imperial Palace with Mao here, which was, the square itself was a scale that I couldn't have imagined before I arrived in this huge place. It was very impressive.
With these monumental buildings all around it. I mean, I'd really not I've heard of European monumentalism in the 19th century, but Chinese monumentalism in the 21st century is quite amazing. The architecture is beautiful and very imposing.
We got to go to the Laoshi Tea House and see a performance there. Some snacks and tea, and it was a variety show. The picture I got inside wasn't very good, so we just had the outside, but we saw an excerpt from Jinju, I can't remember everything. There was like a comedy show. There was a bunch of different things.
There was an acrobatic martial arts display.
Yeah, it was very cool. We got to visit the Olympic Village and the bird's nest on a very hot day. Here we are with Hochak again. Again, a huge monumental sort of feeling in this space. Outside of Beijing, we got to visit Tianjin and go to the conservatory there. And when we first arrived, they took us to see a few performance exams that were going on. The students of the conservatory were giving their exams for their professors in rooms where there was places for public to come in and sit. So we were kind of huddled in, and hopefully, what probably made them nervous. Hopefully, it didn't make them too nervous.
As if those poor students weren't nervous enough doing their exams in front of the jury, a bunch of white people walking in.
And so we saw a Western flute player, we saw a very virtuosic sheng player, some drummers, and the thing I think that most of us found the most interesting was the electric guitar exam, which is not something we see in conservatories in North America for the most part. It was kind of interesting to see it in a conservatory setting. We were told that this was the musicology students learning electric guitar.
I kind of figure that the electric guitar conservatory in North America is anybody's garage.
Yeah, but they were pretty impressive. Most of them played pretty well. You can see this guy's, I have a video of him a little bit.
Asked me what I would have expected going to a conservatory in China, this is about the last thing I think I would have ever come up with. That's a Steve Vai solo that this guy is reproducing note for note, which was, yeah.
Pretty impressive.
Yeah, very
but
impressive.
Also very strange. And they would, each one of the students would finish, there would be complete silence because it was an exam, it wasn't a performance. Complete silence, they would bow quickly and just shuffle off, and the next person would come up and do the same thing. And we're just like, this is very
often the same solo.
Yeah, it was very strange, but they were good. So in Tianjin, besides going to the conservatory, well, actually, also at the conservatory, we got to see, have I guess, an up-close and personal introduction to the guqin. We heard some performances from the students and professors there, and then they allowed us to try our hand at making sound on the guqin. And you can see Lily giving a little lesson here in the photo. And outside of the conservatory in Tianjin, we got some delicious food and got to ride on the Ferris wheel. And here's a picture of Evan looking very uncomfortable with the height.
I don't like heights.
And took a boat on the river, and let's see, we went shopping.
Yeah, then we went to a historic shopping district also down by the river in Tianjin. I have to say, maybe I harp on food too much, but I really love eating. The food in that we were exposed to in Tianjin was really great. It was different from the food in Beijing, and we went to a few different kinds of restaurants. And the people who ran our tour, Mr. Wang, did a very good job of selecting a wide variety of foods that we ate. And one thing I will tell you, I came back with an incredible taste for wood-ear mushrooms. Man, I love those.
So after returning to Beijing from Tianjin, we were taken to the Hanban, the office of the government that's dedicated to teaching about China, is that right? And so we had the tour of their kind of art exhibit in the downstairs. They have a row of all the world's flags. Evan found his flag. And got to see where the center of the Confucius Institute, I guess, is based. We got to tour the Imperial Palace. You want to talk about that one?
Well, yeah, so this was my second time. I've been to China once before on my own, which is very difficult if you don't speak Chinese. And so this was really great to have a tour guide take us through and explain everything that was in the Imperial Palace. I had some idea because The Last Emperor is one of my favorite movies. And we watched The Last Emperor, in fact, just before we left, so that we would have the Imperial Palace fresh in our minds when we got there. We'd say, yeah, that's this spot. But it was really great to see. It's really fantastic to see it for up close. That the courtyard in front of this part of the palace, for instance, is just it's so big. I had no the scope of it. Even just thinking about it still kind of staggers my imagination, and I saw it.
Yeah, to see it in photos before you go there is one thing, but you can't imagine how huge it is, right? I'm sure most people here have been, but it's huge. And the last place, I guess, that we went as a group in our, that's also in Mr. Wong and Chile in the Imperial Palace. Oh, I forgot the Great Wall. We got to climb on the Great Wall. We went to Badaling, which we were told was the best, and you can tell it's the best because it's the most crowded. Where the Americans are like, I don't want to go to the crowded place, but that means it's good, we should go there. And so we climbed pretty far, I'd say, and got nice and sweaty and got some good exercise, and it was absolutely fantastic to see, again, this thing that you see in pictures your entire life, and you get to actually go climb on the Great Wall. It was beautiful.
We were lucky, it was a reasonably clear day, so we could see for a little ways.
Yeah. And our last stop as a group was the Temple of Heaven, which I found particularly interesting because, the aspects of Chinese religion that I have been aware of are things like Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and this is the pre-any of those things kind of animistic religion that has been in China. No? Not animistic? No? I thought it's kind of like Shinto.
It's sacrifice.
Sure, but it's been there like 3,000 years BC or something in this place.
Yeah, but you cannot say animalistic.
Okay,
That's the word.
what would you say?
That's the Chinese court tradition. It's a very elitist.
Okay, well, the way they talked about it was like you're praying to heaven rather than, trying to not. It's not Buddhism. You're not trying to, find anything within yourself. It's not Confucian. It was an aspect of Chinese religion that I had been completely unaware of. And yeah, they have an exhibit of showing the very long history of the imperial interaction at this particular temple that was very fascinating for me at least. So besides the camp-sponsored outings such as this, Evan, myself, and Ho-Chak also had our own forays out into Beijing, where we got permission from the camp people to go out on our own on certain days.
Yeah, sometimes we'd eaten at the cafeteria one too many times, and we felt the need to try something a little bit different. Or they were going on a shopping. There was an organized shopping expedition, and none of us particularly wanted to shop, and we'd rather see something like the Summer Palace. So we employed, to use a good term from scholarship, we employed tactics, and went out and did our own thing. Now, anytime we travel anywhere, the first person that we consult on any matters of food is Anthony Bourdain. And so we watched his show on Beijing before we went, and found the best place to have duck, according to him. And so there we went to the Hutong district, just south of the Imperial Palace, and fortunately we had working smartphones, and we went to Lichun roast duck, which I understand that Li Chun used to be a chef at the very famous place called Changjuda, but he left and created his own place, and so it's in this little hutong kind of nestled away, and it's actually pretty hard to find. But the food was terrific.
It was by far the most money we spent on food in Beijing, but it was worth it.
And it still came up to only about $26 American, so it was pretty. It was a great deal.
The other, yeah, Evan mentioned the other place that we went separate from the camp. We went to the Summer Palace, met up with another University of Michigan student who happened to be studying in Beijing, and toured the Summer Palace. Very beautiful. It was a very different feeling from the downtown palace, right? This is, got to experience nature and see just how much the imperial family like to show off, I feel like, to have this very impressive, huge space. Very beautiful. And let's see, we also tried to go visit Mao downtown again. They didn't schedule for us to go into the mausoleum to see him, but it was closed when we tried to go, so unfortunately we didn't get to meet Mao. And on Evan's birthday.
Yeah, on my birthday. So the last time I went, I had food. I had Uyghur food in a restaurant called Udumuchi in the Hutong district, and I was determined to find this restaurant again, and I had a pretty good idea where it was, but we walked up and down the street several times where I knew it was going to be, and realized that the restaurant had closed. I was very, very, very disappointed. Because Uyghur food is not something you run across very much here in North America. So we ended up at an outside grill where they bring you this big, I don't know, pot of hot coals.
Something that would be not allowed in North America. They would be afraid you would kill yourself on this, but they happily put it on a very unstable table outside.
And then put all kinds of meat and vegetables and what have you, and it was really packed, and it was really hot, and very loud, and very gregarious, and it was actually a really nice birthday dinner.
Yeah. And we also went to the bookstore, right?
Yes, we went to there's a big, I forget what the name of it was.
What's the biggest bookstore in Beijing?
It's 4 or 5 floors.
The big one.
And I basically rated their musical score section, bought as many orchestral scores as I could, and the great thing is they sell orchestral scores with CDs in them. So I have a small but growing library of Chinese Western classical music at home.
And so, as our 2 weeks came to a close, we had our final concert. I was asked to comment on the behalf of the University of Michigan to thank the MCI and talk a little bit about our experiences there. And I embarrassed our translator a little bit, teased him a little bit, and there he is, kind of squirming. And Evan had the chance to be interviewed for the
Chinese Traditional Music Magazine.
Yeah. And I don't think that this image is from that, but this is another online publication where he showed up looking at the instruments in the MCI. And let's see, so at our concert, our European friends, many of the students from the Danish Conservatory were percussionists specifically, and they, over the course of our time in Beijing, learned a piece, I think, by a contemporary Chinese composer on Chinese drums. So we have a small clip of them playing. They had a good time. And let's see,
and then the 0 hour,
yes.
when we had to play. So the masked group of us got together on stage and we played 2 folk songs. I'm sure the one that we will play with you know it turns up all over the place. And it was nerve-wracking, but quite a lot of fun. And I have to say that the sound of a Chinese orchestra is something very particular, the way that the writing is done. Not harmony in the way that we understand it in the West, but more heterophony and texture. And I have all of the parts at home, and I will be putting the score into Sibelius so that I can analyze it and understand it and look to kind of using textures like that in my own music because I thought it was really beautiful.
And you will notice that Evan and I are in the back, kind of tucked away. Visually, you can't really see us, and probably you can't really hear us, and I think that was
For the better.
For the better. 2 weeks on the earth does not get you very far. point out that the Yanqing player in the middle, that was the teacher. That person was not a beginner. So it was a really great experience to be able to perform in a sort of Chinese orchestra and to have that experience firsthand. And I think we both have an interest in continuing to learn more about the erhu, so it was a great start. So to conclude a little bit, just to talk about what we learned through this, it was a very illuminating experience to be able to visit China firsthand, to see things that you've seen in pictures your whole life and get to feel the place and to learn about the culture firsthand, to taste the food, to be there. It was absolutely an invaluable experience, and we thank the CI very much for that chance.
But it wouldn't have been possible without the help of our intrepid tour guide, Mr. Wang, up there, who really opened a lot of doors for us and was really able to explain things. I mean, the guy, I think he told me he'd taken tour groups through the Imperial Palace over 300 times. He knew the place like the back of his hand. That's really valuable, because the first time I was in China on my own, I felt very lost. And I didn't really know what I was looking at. I thought it was incredibly interesting, but I felt very much outside and not able to participate because I don't speak Chinese. So it was great to have such a competent tour guide with us, and also
yeah,
our other tour guide,
to go with Ho-Chak, who he was really excited to be able to introduce things from where he came from to us, and he took us to a Hong Kongese restaurant and got to say, like, oh, this is my food, and just to help us interact with this place. It was absolutely great to have him along, and we had an awesome time. And also to meet our new friends from Europe and from UCLA too. Our friends, they're our Facebook friends now, we keep in touch. It's been really good. Okay, can we talk about that? So he's talked about the impact that this has had on his awareness of Western classical composition. For me, this was an opportunity to learn more in detail about Chinese history in general, Chinese music history more specifically, and as a person who focuses on Japanese music mostly in my own scholarship, it was very interesting and I think good for broadening my perspective of how East Asia kind of works and the differences between how Japan has dealt with forces of globalization, for example, in the last 100 years, and how China has dealt with similar forces but in different kinds of ways. It was a really good experience for me to understand that part of the world in terms of my scholarship and just in terms of being a human on the planet. It was really good.
I think that the bottom line of this trip for both of us is that although the trip did come to an end, the end was only the beginning. And that our interest in China has been sparked, and that it's a big, big place, and we only saw Tianjin and Beijing and probably not all of either. So there's lots more to be discovered by us, and we look forward to going back many times and seeing as much as we possibly can in our lifetimes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Come, go ahead.
Yeah, what was noticeably missing in all those pictures was the famous smog of Beijing. Where did that go?
Oh, we didn't include those photos. There were some very smoggy days. There were some very clear days too. But what the most shocking thing, I'll use the word shocking. I saw a local walking down the sidewalk with a gas mask on one day. I was like, yep, that's pretty bad.
When our plane took off at the airport on their way back home, I could barely see down the runway. And then when the plane left the ground, I looked out the window and it was just white.
Yeah.
From the moment we left the
Yellowish
ground
white.
until we broke the top of the clouds. So there was plenty of smog to go around.
I'd say it was about like 60% smoggy days, 40% clear days. We had some clear days too. We got some good pictures.
The clear days were beautiful.
Yeah.
Who was your audience at your performance?
There were definitely other conservatory members. There were a lot of, I think, government people came to see what the MCI was offering to international students. I don't know if there were many people from the general public. I don't think so. I think there were a lot of government and university conservatory people in attendance. Yeah. It was a pretty full house too. It was.
Oh, and the Danish embassy.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, the Danish government also came.
How much time did you have to spend practicing the musical instrument in a short time?
Not enough.
And then, how many times of the rehearsals you have to do before this final recital?
We had our kind of lessons by instrument. All the erhu players together, for example, did them together, deeds it together 3 or 4 times for a pretty long time, like an hour or 2 hours.
Yeah.
Fairly long lessons. And then we had the chance to practice a few times by ourselves for a half hour or so, maybe a little longer. And then rehearsal all together was just the day before. We had a dress rehearsal where we worked out how to play together and work together. And again, all but one person in this group was musicians already. So we already knew how to do that, most of us. So it wasn't a monumental challenge, but yeah, it was a rush, kind of. But we made it happen.
An individual practice, it was basically as much as we could squeeze in between other activities. And so if there was, if there was time, mostly that's where we would be. And I would be sitting there playing a single note, trying to make that single note sound the same on this part of the bow as it did on this part of the bow, which I discovered this is why I did not become a violinist.
And do you plan to keep learning these musical instruments while you're here?
Well, we kind of have the chance to do so. There's the Chinese music ensemble class that goes on. There's a student here. And we can practice. You haven't joined because he's writing his dissertation, but I'm the course assistant for the class. And unfortunately, there's so many students right now that they took all the erhu, so I can't practice. But there's that opportunity. We don't have an instrument, but it would be nice to someday be able to do that and hopefully be in a position where we would have someone who knows what they're doing who can tell us what we're doing wrong.
Was there a conductor?
There was no conductor, no.
The lead young Qing player was basically the person who kept everything together.
Okay.
The young Qing kind of, I don't know if you could hear, but they mostly were playing a kind of an eighth note pattern that was keeping the beat for everybody.
Well, she was very expressive with her gestures, so she could kind of do the work of a conductor a little bit to keep us together. She's right in the middle.
And I spent most of my time watching the bow of my teacher and sort of trying to follow her. But if you see her arm in the video, I mean, it's like a bird. It just has this incredible gracefulness.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I'm hoping to send her my erhu piece once it's written.
Do you have to learn how to read the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notation,
Yeah.
musical notation instead of the traditional stuff?
They gave us Western notation, didn't they?
Oh, Western.
They did. I wish they hadn't. I don't know why she didn't have the what's it called?
Numeral.
Yeah, the numerals, but it's just a special cipher
Cipher.
notation. That's right. They teach the cipher notation in the ensemble here at Michigan, and she explained how it works. And I think it's easier to play. I think it's easier to play with the cipher notation than the Western notation personally on those instruments. So I'm not sure. I suppose they were just trying to make it easier for us so we didn't have to learn instrument and notation. But no, let's do that.
I think if I had to learn cipher notation, I would have found that a bit challenging. Because you have experience of similar kinds of notation elsewhere, but I don't. So
It was
I was
probably a smart move to
thankful to see something I
translate
recognized.
for the people used to Western notation.
But I understand. I went to see the concert of the student composers at the CCOM, and they had there were a lot of scores that called for erhu and string quartet or something like that, and I was able to get a peek at some of the scores, and I realized that even with the contemporary practices, some people write in cipher notation, but some people write in standard notation for contemporary music. So I think there's a kind of a variety of approaches.
So one more, then we can close it up. So maybe not, then let's thank Megan and Evan, and then we'll close it, thank them, and then you can stay on for ask a few more personal questions. So thank you. Thank you.